This is Playing with the House of Mouse. I am Grant Allen. I'm the design director for Dlala Studios. I'm just going to kind of give a brief kind of description of what I'm going to talk about and the contents of kind of what this talk is going to entail. So I always like to do this just so everyone knows what they're getting into. They can run out or run out the door beforehand. So essentially, I'm just going to be doing a little bit about me. I promise it will be a little bit about Dlala Studios, the crust, which you might be sitting there going, well, what is the crust? And you'll have to wait till a bit later to hear what that is. Breaking down the crust, and then just some final thoughts. So this is the really, really boring bit. It's a little bit about me, and I promise it is only a little, but just to tell you a little bit about myself and just how I got to where I am. Pause for dramatic effect. Cool. So as I said, I'm the design director at Dlala Studios. Nearly had 10 years in the industry, so over 9, I guess, technically. I began working as a concept artist, then slowly over time realized that there were a lot of people who are a lot better at it than me, so decided that I would try and dip my toes into design. From that, I started working with the design department with Dlala, slowly being given small tasks, slowly working my way up to some bigger features, done a lot of reading, done a lot of playing games. And then somehow I've ended up being the design director. A lot of people think it's because I have something on our CEO, AJ. I promise you I don't. So we work with new and existing IP. We've shipped on a variety of platforms with partners such as Team 17, Microsoft Rare, and Disney. And I am also a big fan of the work of Kaz Ayade. If you know who that is, well done. Cool. So a little bit about Dlala. So the motto for the studio, it's very cheesy, but it's very true, is making games we love with people we love for people to love since 2012. So I feel very lucky because I do feel like this is very true. I do feel like everyone in the studio has a lot of passion that they put into the games. And I'm very, very proud of the games that we do produce. And there's not a day that I wake up and think I don't want to go into work. And I feel very lucky and privileged that I get to feel that. So, Dlala Studios, we tend to specialize. Well, actually, let's talk a little bit about the studio itself. So, we've been around for 12 years in a little town called Witham in Essex. Other known things Witham is known for is Dorothy L. Sayers and also Ollie Murs. No cheers. Okay, so starting off, the founders kind of worked in their garages for the whole time until we managed to actually buy ourselves some studio space. I would talk a little bit more about the journey, but I feel like if anyone's watched AJ do a talk, and he's done hundreds of them, you probably already know every little bit of the journey. So essentially, that's just a brief bit of history and just how the actual studio got started. And I just want to point out a couple of key things that we do as a studio. So we do have kind of specialize in 2D hand-drawn animation for our projects that we work on. As I said before, we work on kind of existing franchises. We've got 11 plus years industry experience. And as well as that, we have experience on multiple platforms and shipping for multiple platforms. That's a mouthful. And shipping on multiple platforms. And a bit braggy, award-winning multiplayer experience. Here's just a couple of the things that we have. Some of the games, people, and the IP that the key members of the team have worked on. Hopefully there are some in there that you recognize. And if you don't, please do check them out. Or if you don't want to do that, that's absolutely fine. I respect your time. Cool. So now I'm going to talk about Disney Illusion Island. So again, I'm hoping that because some of you are here, some of you might know about it or have played it to have some kind of idea what the game is. If not, that's absolutely fine. I'll kind of go into it in a little bit. But for now, I'm just going to play the trailer so I can chip away 2 minutes from that 45 minutes. Thank you. Perfect. So, just to talk a little bit about that trailer, Disney Illusion Island is, it was released last year on the Switch. It's a single and multiplayer Mickeyvania. I'm usually not allowed to say Mickeyvania, but as AJ is not on the stage and I will say it's a Mickeyvania. So I like to make up words, and it will make sense in context in a bit. So the Fabulous Four are in there, so that's Mickey, Minnie, Donald, and Goofy. And it was inspired by the classic Disney games you can think of, and kind of with a modern twist, the kind of Castle of Illusion, World of Illusion, even looking back at kind of like Quackshot and stuff like that. We also won a few awards. I'd usually pause for dramatic effect, but I already done that, so I'm afraid you're actually going to read some of these, so I'm just going to skip forward, else you'll think we've copied them all. There you go. So, what happened? So, playing with the House of Mouse, what actually happened? How do you approach taking a 100-year-old company's pride and joy and approach it in a new and exciting way? How do you not go insane? Is a hot dog a sandwich? I'll be talking about all of these things through the presentation, and also just in general how we went about playing with that oh-so-loved mouse and his friends. Big disclaimer, as with a lot of things. This is from personal experience on a single project. So this isn't going to work on every project, but in turn has some general themes which I feel can be used when working with larger IPs or projects in general. The crust. So this is a little look into the process of working with the House of Mouse. So I hear you're all being very loud. What is the crust? Do you mean bread? No, but bread does have crusts and you should always eat them. So I'm talking about something a little bit different. I'm talking about a nice little acronym which I came up with, and everyone likes an acronym, right? So here it is. I like to talk about these kind of key points to do with the process of working on Disney Illusion Island. It's what helped it be as smooth as process as possible that we did have, and helped us tackle kind of the reimagining of the most loved characters in the world. So the first one is collab, or as an old man like me likes to say, collaboration. The second one is respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, as the song goes. Unique ideas, we all have them and we all love them. Seeing it through, 2020 vision is not required. And transparency, like Bruce Willis in that film. So I'm going to talk about each one of these points and just how we use them in the process of making Disney Illusion Island. But that would be too easy just to talk about them in that order, and it fits really nicely just to say the word crust, but unfortunately, that doesn't work in kind of the order in which we actually did the work on the project. So I've decided that I'm going to put it into a more cohesive order, and it's this. Yes, it is the URCs. So now we're going to take a little look at each one of those. So, unique ideas. What makes the game unique? What are you as a studio, as a person, bringing to the table? What can you do that no one else can? You know, this is the starting point. This is where the idea is born, and this is where the project begins. And sometimes even earlier than that. So sometimes this is just what gets your foot in the door. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the things that we kind of pitched to and talked about with Disney while we were kind of coming up with the initial ideas for what Illusion Island is. So we wanted to bring us, which sounds really stupid, but we wanted to bring us. So we wanted to bring our experience in 2D animations with us. We wanted to bring that same feeling that we had with Battletoads, which was the feeling of, playing a cartoon. One of the things that I really, really am proud of with Battletoads is just that feeling of it feels like I'm sat there watching a cartoon, eating my cereal on a Saturday morning. And we kind of wanted to bring that across, and we wanted to do something bigger and better with Disney Illusion Island. We had loved what we'd done there, but we definitely wanted to push it more with the title. And, what better way to do it when someone's handing you some of the 4 most iconic characters in the world. So on top of that, we wanted to continue our work with our inbuilt, with our inbuilt animation toolkit, which we had made with Unity. So this allows us to essentially get hand-drawn work into the engine with ease, and allow us to kind of quickly iterate on that and to have a quick turnaround on our animations that we do have. I can't explain to you how amazing it is to essentially be able to see a hand-drawn animation and have it go into game in the speed in which the team is able to iterate on them. It just means that we're a lot more smoother in kind of the iteration process with this. So along with that, we wanted to approach the characters in a slightly different way. Of course, it doesn't loop. Now, with that, we had a toy analogy. So essentially, usually, when you're coming to animate these characters, we had decided that each one of those would be an object. So essentially, that would dictate to us how we would animate those characters. Because of the type of game that it is, and we want it to be as accessible as possible, and we didn't want anyone to get left behind, all of the characters in Disney Illusion Island have the exact same numbers for their running speed, their jump speed, everything. But we wanted the feeling of what they were doing to be different. So when people play it, a lot of the time people will turn around to us and will go, oh, Goofy's a lot slower. And technically, no, he's not. He's the exact same numbers. It's just we animate him in a different way to what we do the other characters. So for example, Mickey, we used a toy analogy for each of them. Mickey was a bouncing ball. Minnie was a paper aeroplane. Donald was a slingshot. And Goofy was a slinky. And we just moved forward with that, with all the animations, passing them through this lens of this toy analogy, just to create unique feelings for each of these characters, even though technically, on paper, they are exactly the same. Metroidvanias. So I mentioned Mickeyvania earlier. So Metroidvanias, we knew that we wanted it to be a Metroidvania. We love Metroidvanias. I love Metroidvanias. But unfortunately, there is a little bit of an issue with Metroidvanias, which is they are hard. They are good, they are fun, but they are hard. And a lot of the time, they do have a skill wall, which you do have to get past. So essentially, we knew we wanted to do a Metroidvania, but how do we make this more welcoming or even a good starting point for people to get introduced to the genre and get them hooked? So we started thinking about who it was for. I would like to thank Liam because I stole a few of his slides from one of his presentations for this, so I will not take credit for that. So we needed to make sure that we were making something accessible, something that anyone could pick up and play. You know, it was something that was very important to us that people could share this experience with their families. It was very important to us that someone could have a good time if they play it alone. But it needs to be as accessible as possible and needs to be able to be enjoyed by as many people as possible. Secondary to that, we wanted to create something which had broad appeal. So we wanted something which would be people who were Disney fans would love, people who are Metroidvania fans would love, people who are platforming fans would love. And on top of that, kind of one of the most important things that we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that it was first-time friendly. So we wanted to make sure that people who weren't fans of all of those things or who never experienced them could play this and still have a good time. This could be the first game that you ever play. This could be the first game that you give to your kid. We took a lot of time and consideration into the mechanics that made up these kind of games and kind of breaking them down to the rawest and most digestible forms, which I like to think we did successfully. One of my favorite moments from watching people play the game is the moment when they realize that it is a Metroidvania. This usually happens around about 15 to 20 minutes into the initial playtime, and I absolutely love it. And on top of that, we did add in some additional mechanics, multiplayer easements, which I will talk about a little bit later. So, boom, that is who we aimed it for. We wanted it to be a Metroidvania that could sit in, I'm pretty sure there's a technical name for this kind of diagram where the circles going over each other, but to sit in the middle of that is what I'll say. So this led us to Awesome Alone, Better Together. Anyone who's watched any kind of interviews with any of the members of staff on Disney Illusion Island, you would have heard them mention this, and this was something which was super, super really important to us. We wanted to make sure that this game was something that could be enjoyed, as I mentioned, if you play by yourself, but also enjoyed with anyone else that you are playing with. We started thinking about bigger picture in regards to what that meant and in regards to how we would achieve this. And, you know, we wanted it to be enjoyed in multiplayer, but we didn't want it to be a case of that we were including mechanics which could only be used as part of the critical path when you're playing in multiplayer. So we started thinking up a couple of different things. Anyone who has played the game will know that you can hug each other to essentially be able to transfer health, well, not transfer, but to be able to give each other health. This meant that anyone who was struggling as they were playing along and needed that extra help could do that. And it's just a nice, fun interaction to have with people. We found that a lot of the time through playtesting, people were hugging each other even if they didn't need the health, but we slowly made a stop to that. As well as that, we had dropping the rope. So in the game, at any point, you can drop a rope off of any platform and another person is able to jump and climb up it. This was something which we decided to put in just because we wanted to make sure that we were able to handle people who may be struggling when it comes from a health factor, people who may be struggling when it comes from an actual traversal factor. So it meant that as long as one of you could do it, you all could do it because you could drop the rope. On top of that, we also had a leapfrog, which just gave a little bit of extended distance. So we had the verticality with the rope, and we had the distance with the leapfrog. Something which was very important with this as well is that we designed these in such a way so that they were mechanics which could be actively used at any time. So the whole idea behind this was the fact that I know that I could play it with my niece as much as some of the other people within the company could play it with their family, and we would still have unique experiences that only we could do. I know that I dropped my rope at that point for my niece, and she really appreciated that. So we're kind of allowing the players to create these moments to make it better together. So, Disney, unique ideas, Disney. We're all massive Disney fans at Delilah. And I just want to talk about Disney media as a whole, because this was taken into account when we were thinking about the unique ideas for this project. So the joy of a Disney park. Now, one of the early conversations that me and AJ had when we were talking about this game was that, we wanted it to be a Metroidvania, and we were sat there scrolling through different books that AJ had in his office, and he has this one book which is of all of the map illustrations for all of the Disney parks throughout different periods of time. Now, as soon as we took a look at that, we knew that I turned and said, that's a Metroidvania map. If you look at how the parks are interconnected, if you look at how well the parks interconnect the different themes of each part of the park, it is a Metroidvania map. It has its own biomes. It has connections through those biomes. It has clear, distinct visuals. It has clear, distinct audio in between each of these sections. And that is something that we wanted to do with this game. We wanted to make sure that it was seamless when you went from one biome to the next biome. We wanted to make sure that the music blended perfectly as you went through. We didn't want it to feel as if it was a hard cut. And you get that when you walk around Disney parks. There we go. So in doing this and knowing that we wanted to create essentially what was our own version of a Disney park for the Metroidvania structure of the game, we could start creating our own world that these Fab Four could travel around in. And we needed to make sure this was a world that we could only create and this was a story that we could only tell. So I'm going to pause just for about 5 seconds on each of these because I feel like it's very unjust if I don't let people actually look at the art, because it is very beautiful art. So something we needed to make sure as well when we were building this world is it needed to make sense that the Fab Four would travel here from a visual perspective and from a narrative perspective. And we needed to make sure that each one of these worlds, it sounds really weird, but it needed to be unique and it needed to be new, but it needed to make sense that they would exist there. Oh. So something which was very important to us and that we wanted to have in the game was the player to feel as if they are making a change to the world and they are doing something or adapting or manipulating the world. Manipulation is probably the wrong word, but changing the world in some way. So in the game, you collect magical books called tomes, and these tomes can be placed into magical bookcases. And these can cause things called unifications. So we wanted to make sure that the player felt as if they were having an impact on the world. So I'm going to show you I'm going to show you an animation from one of the unifications, but essentially what this would do is you would go and you would place the book in, and this would create a whole new section of the world which was blocked off before, or essentially would dig into parts of the structure of the world. And here is a little clip here. Shout out to India and Patrice, because this is one of my favorite animations. I could have played it with the sound on, but I thought I'd rather let you imagine. You have to play the game to hear what it sounds like. But essentially, yeah, this is all to do with making the player feel as if it has an impact on the world. Whether that be from essentially making huge vines burst out from the floor, creating mechanical worms which throw up bugs, there you go, or whether it might be turning a scrapyard into a discotheque. We just wanted the player to feel as if they had an impact. Cool. Respect. Now, this is something which everyone's going, of course you need to respect. Of course you need to respect the IP. But I think it's very important to bring up, because I think people, during the process of actually what they're doing, do tend to forget this to a certain extent when they're in the thick of them. So Disney, 100 years of wonder. Wow, such history, such long history. So there's lots of resources that we thankfully were allowed to look at, that Disney gave us, to be able to go through and research on all the different characters, the history of the characters, the history of the games. The Disney games, I would hate to think about the amount of time that I spent playing all the different Disney games, including all of the Japanese exclusive ones. Not to mention all of the Metroidvanias and all of the platformers which we played. But it was very important for us to kind of understand the characters and understand where they had been used and how they had been used in the past, to know how we would use them in the future and how we could use them in a new way in the future. Just a little look into the history of the characters. So there's kind of many versions of them, and we kind of had to think about what our version of them would be like. And we had to think, you know, one of AJ's and my favorite Mickeys is the old white-faced Mickeys, and, you know, in love with the kind of Paul Rudd shorts that got released a few years ago. So you can probably see a little bit of influence in that on our versions of them. Along with that, though, there's additional challenges, because we're not just making a cartoon, are we? We're making a video game. So we had to essentially make sure that our characters were readable. We had to make sure that not only was it a cool concept, that when they're running, you could tell they're running because their arms were big enough, or that when you're jumping, the animation gives enough clarity to the player to know where they're jumping from or where they're going to land. You know, it would be cool just to redesign and be like, this is wicked, but they do have to functionally work in game. So this kind of led to a couple of different scenarios, which I believe Lucy and AJ call them shotgun blasts. I'm sure there's probably a better name for that. But essentially, it meant that we had to go through iterations of the character. We had to make sure that the clarity of the character was right and that the moves were easily readable for the player to understand. So yeah, there's some pretty interesting ones here. I think number 10 is probably one of my favorites there. And here's a couple more of those shotgun blasts. So what was really important as well is once we got the okay and understood how we were going to actually animate the Fab Four, it then made the rule set that we had a lot easier when it came to creating our own characters. So it allowed us to kind of build on that new style that we had created with the Fab Four, and allow us to kind of make sure that when we were creating these characters that it made sense that they would be interacting with the Fab Four. It sounds really strange, but we needed to make sure it made sense visually that the Fab Four were interacting with a large, three-armed, purple-pink alligator crocodile thing, such as Mazzy. Pretty sure it's an alligator, but that's for another time. Cool. Collaboration. So just going to talk a little bit around here on open communication, regular catch-ups, and clear vision shared. They're kind of the highlights, but I'm going to go into a bit of a deeper dive here. Great meme. Cool. So I know it sounds silly, but the whole game essentially is a collaboration between Delilah and between Disney. Wow. But this collaboration isn't a case of that contracts are signed and then we go our separate ways. This is a case of that the collaboration is daily. This is communication is keeping up between each other as much as possible. It's happening every day. We're checking things with them. We're making sure that, making sure we're not treading on any toes in regards to kind of the characters, making sure that we're not doing anything that maybe couldn't have been done earlier on a different game. As I said, it's not a case of just signing the paperwork and we'll keep to ourselves. This has always been, on the whole, a brainchild of both Disney and Delilah. So with all games we pitch or we make, there is always pillars. These are something that we work on very early, and sometimes these can change. Sometimes they get changed through the process of the actual project. Sometimes they get changed 500 times before you actually start putting any code on paper. Yeah, let's say that. So essentially, these are something we collaborated on Disney with to make sure that we could keep a clear vision when we're kind of moving forward with any decisions that we are making. So our 3 pillars are authentically Disney, distinctly Delilah. So this is making sure that we're making something which is respecting, as I mentioned before, is respecting Disney, but is also something only Delilah could do. We wanted to make sure that it was a playable cartoon, just like with Battletoads. That was a pillar on Battletoads, and we wanted to keep that. That one I mentioned before, which is awesome alone, better together. So just making sure we're keeping that key experience enjoyable for individuals as much as it is for people playing together. So I had mentioned open communication earlier, but this is super, super important. So as I'd mentioned, we do have regular catch-ups. So that's catch-up, not ketchup. So we do need to make sure that, as I said, there's no surprises and all information is very, very transparent between both us and Disney. These catch-ups happen not just from a leads perspective, not just from a C-suite perspective. These happen from departmental. There's always a design catch-up with the liaison with Disney. There's always tech catch-ups, there's art catch-ups, there's animation catch-ups. We are making sure that we are having complete open communication as we are building this game. Feedback is king. So personally for us, very, very early on, we needed to make sure we were getting feedback from Disney directly. So we were always sending builds as soon as they were ready. We were always giving them Excel sheets to be able to put that feedback in. And we created a feedback sheet where essentially it was live. We could put in the information that they had given us and we would talk about the actions which we would do moving forward with that. So it just meant from their perspective, they know that they are being listened. And from their perspective, they know as well what we are doing to action what that feedback might be. And a problem shared is a problem halved. So it's very, very good to have kind of open conversations in regard to issues that you might come across, whether that be from a mechanical perspective, from a character perspective, or from a narrative perspective, because Disney has such a rich history, but also that our friends over there who work there have such a rich history in understanding how those characters are used. If we want to use them in a particular way and they know, well, that's just not going to fly, being able to know that super early on before we've wasted, I don't know, like 10 days on an animation for it, say, for example. But it's good to have that, to know that if there are any issues that we do come across with that, that they are there to be able to help us with creative solutions. So, clear milestones. So, for anyone who doesn't know what a milestone is essentially a deliverable date which you set and then also set what you want to deliver on that date to whoever you are delivering it to. So, this is going to sound really silly, but making sure that from our perspective we are outlining what we wanted to achieve, make sure we were actually giving them what they wanted to see on these deliverables. As I'd mentioned before, feedback is king, and making sure that they do have visuals on the feedback that they are given and then also the plan of action to that. And I know it sounds very silly, but making sure essentially that we always like to over-deliver a little bit, whether that be that we know we can do a little bit more. I hope no one from Disney's watching this. We can make sure we know that we can do a little bit more before that milestone and get it in than we tend to. mainly just because we want to put it in front of their faces earlier and be able to get that feedback. But just outlining kind of the clear milestones and having that open communication between them also helps if it's a case of, hey, you know, we might not get this done, but we're going to move focus onto here. And they'll be like, oh, okay, cool, that's absolutely fine. Next, transparency. I can see right through you. I hope everyone likes emojis because I ran out of art budget, so there's going to be no other nice pictures here. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about transparency. So, changes to major and minor features. So during the process, it's always very, very good to keep track of these changes, as I mentioned before, making sure there are no surprises between Delilah and Disney. We also kept documents up to date with all of this. So this is for all departments, essentially. If anything changes or if anything is updated since the last build, we'll put absolutely everything in there to make sure that there are no surprises when we hand it over. So something which is really interesting and a story around this is the game did have, well, was going to have combat in it. And me and AJ decided that the only reason we actually wanted it is because Metroidvanias have combat in them. So we spent absolutely ages working on a pitch to prove that we didn't need combat. And we were very, very worried about that. We then pitched it, and then the reply we got was, yeah, that makes sense. So we were worried, but it's still very, very important to make sure that those major changes, which potentially you might move forward with, are communicated. So when things go wrong or just don't work, great example that I just spoke of, which was with the combat. It's very, very important just to talk about if a feature isn't working. Say, for example, when we first started and we were looking at the map and the map features and how we were going to approach those from a Metroidvania perspective, we were not going to show a huge amount on the map, but through kind of initial feedback and initial workings around with Disney, we realized that there was a lot more that we need to show, and there was a lot more from an accessibility perspective that we need to include within the map. So they told us it wasn't working, and we said, you're right, it's not. It's very important to have this honesty as well between us and Disney, just to be able to make sure that if we spot anything or if they spot anything, that we can speak up. I've already spoken about that. That's probably an important thing to talk about, which is no one ever gets it right first time. I definitely don't. Cool, so showing you're working. So something which was really, really drilled into us through the whole process of working with Disney is showing you're working. And I think this is super, super important, just to hark back to the combat, removing combat from the game. Me and AJ made sure that we went through every step of why we didn't want to have combat in there. You know, we put in including, we even had enemies. I think we had 3 enemies, which you could jump on, and it was like Mario stomping on them, but for some reason it didn't make sense to us that the Fab Four would be invited to a picnic on an island and then just decide to kick the creatures that lived there. That just didn't make sense. So it was very important to show that kind of evidence and the process of how we got to where we were, where it was, combat just doesn't work here. And it's very important for the studio as well, because there's nothing worse than when you're working on something and then essentially a year later, someone asks a question which you answered a year ago, but you don't have any reference to why you didn't do that back then. So you end up essentially doing the same thing over again. And the last one here is seeing it through. So this is getting to the finish line no matter what. So keeping that clear vision, making sure essentially that you are sticking to the pillars, making sure that anything that you add to the game is making it better. If stuff isn't working, if stuff might work, but just it doesn't fit that vision, just removing it. Again, I keep going back to it, but combat is a great example. Going back to move forward. So as I mentioned before, documentation is super, super important when we are making these decisions to major and minor features of the game. It is important to have that evidence to back it up. And that is important not just from a studio perspective, but from a partner perspective, and making sure that again, it feeds back into the showing your workings. But sometimes you do need to have that, and you do need to have that reference to be able to look back on to move forward. And I just said that. So ultimately, does it make the game better? And we should always be thinking about this. You should always be talking about this. No matter what is getting added in, you should always think about if it is improving the game, if a feature is adding anything to the title. And essentially, so I got this quote wrong when I'd done a practice run through. This was a quote that AJ said. I'm going to look at him as I say it. The work you do today should be the worst work you'll do from this point on, which I believe is true, which I believe that every day when you look at a build, it should get better, you should be adding, you should be improving. And equally to that, knowing your team's strengths and its weaknesses. So making sure that there's nothing wrong with having a weakness in an area. From my perspective, systems design. I am not very good at systems design, but I know that I have a team member who is absolutely fantastic at systems design. So whether he likes it or not, he will be given the system design work. Or I know when people are very, very good at combat design, it's all about making sure that knowing the scope you have and the time that you have, that you're able to kind of look at the strengths and look at the weaknesses, make sure that if anyone is weak in a certain area, that you are being able to give them the time to be able to develop, to be able to help them with anything that they are doing. And like I said, there is nothing wrong with having a weakness. So, yes, I have a little bit of time. A little bit of a recap and a few final words. Crust. I'm going back to crust now, making sure collaboration, making sure that that is there from the beginning, making sure it is continued, and making sure that you are talking to each other through the whole process of creation. Respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, find out what it means to you. It's important to look at the characters, look at the IP you're working with, respect it, and also move forward with it. And you move forward with it by having unique ideas. What do you bring to it? What is it that you can do that no one else can do? Seeing it through, making sure you can actually do it, making sure you're sticking to it, making sure you're looking at those pillars, making sure that you are getting that end result. And transparency, just being open, being honest, talking about issues to be able to look back to move forward. So that's it. I hope this was helpful in some way, shape or form. I do want to repeat that, this isn't for every project partner or IP, it's different. This is just an example of how we went about working together. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, I will probably be wandering around here or in a bakery or in a video game shop. Or I recently discovered there's a Bandai Gachapon shop in the town, and I've spent too much money in there already, so I'll probably be in there. If you do see me, please do chat. Ignore my face. I unfortunately just look like that, and no matter what my face looks like, I promise I will chat. Thank you, Develop. Thank you to all the amazing work from the team members of Delilah that you've seen on this presentation. Honestly, the game would have not been made if it wasn't for the extremely talented team that we did have on it. Also, I meant to remember that you're going to get an email about this talk. So answer the questions that they give you honestly. So, thank you. This is my idea of a very nice day out. And also, a hot dog is not a sandwich. Thank you.